Hi everyone, welcome back to Knit 101 with @Tecstiliau.com. We are working on developing your stitch vocabulary and giving you all the basics to develop your knitting as a practice and to enjoy. So we started, just to recap, by doing casting on, then you learned to knit and you learned to cast off to create your little garter stitch square. And garter stitch is the same on both sides because you are knitting every row, and that's why we had the stitch marker there, so that we could identify which was the front and which was the back, since they are both the same with knitting of every row. Today though, we want you to expand your vocabulary and add purling. Purling is the opposite of knitting, and it allows you to create a piece of knitted fabric that looks the same and flat on one side, because all your knit stitches are on one side and those are compensated by purling on the opposite side, so that you always get what looks like a knit stitch on the front. And it creates stockinette stitch. So you will have garter stitch, which is the knit only, and you will have stockinette stitch, which is the knit one row, purl one row. Okay, so I've already started my square. I'm on a 20 stitch cast on again, and I've started to knit one row, purl one row. So I've just knit a row. What I'm going to do is, in fact, I've just purled a row, so I'm quickly going to knit across this row. So if you remember, we throw the yarn over to knit, and that happens in this way. So you're going under to knit, throwing it over, and you see how my right needle is going under. This is quite important for when you start to come and purl, but this is knitting, so we're knitting across like that, our 20 stitches. Okay, and then when you've got that knit row done, which will be the first row off your cast on, anyways, then you turn that as you normally would. So your right needle becomes your left needle, but rather than knit again, I want to purl this time. So purling, rather than going under like a knit stitch, you're coming with your right needle over top of the left, and your yarn is in the front. Yes, can you see that? My yarn is in the front and my needle is going over the top, and then I'm going around that top needle before I push under and off. Okay, so under the front of the stitch, over top of the left needle, then throw your yarn over your right needle, and then it goes under and off. Yes, so under and over the top of the left, throw your yarn, because your yarn is in the front, and off. Okay, so if I just take it through, speeding up a little bit, off, so under, over the top of the left needle, throw, under, off. Okay, it's a little bit like a reverse knit stitch, but it's hard to visualize that. Okay, so if I just go through the basics again for you, you're going under the front of the stitch but over top of the left needle. Then you are throwing the yarn from the front, coming back under and off. Through, throw, off. Okay, so the important things to remember are that your yarn needs to be in the front, and you are coming through the front of the stitch rather than going into the back of your stitch. Okay, and I'm coming to the last of my 20. Okay, that is my purl row, and you'll see that the back of my knitting looks very similar to the garter stitch that we've been doing previously. But if I turn, the front looks much flatter and it has nice little rows of knitted stitches which is what you might typify as being knit. Okay, so then you would knit one, because we're doing stockinette stitch. We just did a purl row, so we're going to do a knit row. And remember, when you knit, you go under the left needle. When you purl, you come over top of the left needle. Okay, that's my knit row. And I'm going to do one more purl row for you. So that's my knit row. Turn. So I'm looking at the back. It's quite obviously the back of my piece of knitting. And then I've got my yarn in the front. And I'm going over the top of the needle. And then coming out on the bottom. So over the top. And I realize I put my thumb on there just to steady things because I am working with flat needles, but also it doesn't steady so much when you're purling as it does when you're knitting. So you go through the top, over, down at the bottom, over the left, down, out. Okay. Great. I want you to give it a go, have a try, and come back when you think you've got about a square, so that you are looking at sort of somewhere between 20 and 30 rows from a 20 stitch cast on. Okay, knit one row, purl one row, and I'll see you back here in a few minutes. Okay. Welcome back. I have completed what I think is a square, roughly. I have done 23 rows, ending on a purl row, so that I would start again on a knit row if I was to continue working, and 20 stitches across, remember. So I've roughly done it, so it's the same size if I line it up with my garter stitch square. Yes. And you'll see the difference between garter stitch and stockinette is that it does curl at the sides and it does curl up from the bottom. That's just the nature of stockinette. It has the tendency to do that because you're lining all the stitches up in the same way on each side, but that is nothing that a little bit of pressing, steaming, blocking and setting won't resolve, or if you put some ribbing on the bottom of it in future projects, that will also resolve that for you. But it's a nice soft flat knit. If you were to complete a tension square, the notorious tension square, this is what it is. And you measure your tension by counting your stitches across, 20, and your rows up, 23. And you would measure that against approximately 10 centimeters or 4 inches. But you want to make sure, this is my Omnigrid here, if I put it in the corner here, 1, 2, 3, that would be 4 inches. So that's a little bit short and a little bit short. Yes, I'd really have to stretch it. So that's probably about 3.5 inches as opposed to 4 inches. So I would have to have more stitches across, for example, and more rows up in order to get 4 inches under that tension. And you can match your tension up on your yarn labels. You can see here on this yarn label, not the same yarn, but quite nicely details in DK yarn. If I were to knit 19 stitches by 27 rows up, then I should have 4 inches or 10 centimeters in a block. That is the tension for that particular wool. And you'll see it with that little diagram, and often it's 10 centimeters or 4-inch squares that you're knitting. So that is what a tension square is. You should be ready to move on. If you can knit and purl, then you can be on to some new patterns. Join us again soon for a different type of cast on, and also for some more knitting patterns and strategies. Thank you for joining us. See you soon. Enjoy your knitting. Mun hai.